My name's Adam Wilkinson, and my company is called Impact Measurement Limited. We're a non-academic partner in the Strength2Food programme, and we've been working with Edinburgh University to develop this food impact tool that I'm going to talk about today. This has arisen directly from the research that has been carried out on the programme in 5 different European countries, in particular looking at primary school and primary school supply chains and food services. What we wanted to do was to use that research to create a tool that would be of practical value for procurement and food service providers. And in doing so, that would be helpful on a policy level to inform both change and actually the direction of policy as well. So we hope we've achieved that. And today I want to take you through quickly a little bit about what's required to make the tool work and what it might mean for you. So how does it work? The first stage is that we need some information from the user, you, about your meals and your menus and your requirements. And in doing so, we've tried to ask for the bare minimum of information. We've tried to make it in a form which will be easy for you to acquire and to put into the system. And that's quite important to us because we want it to make it as easy as possible. But equally, we have to make sure we have enough information to make the results credible. As soon as that information is put in, the tool will calculate what your total carbon footprint is from the food service and also which parts of the procurement contribute the most emissions. And we break that down, and we also look at things like plate waste, as that's an important part and it's a separate part, and we can calculate the public value as well. And to do the public value and the economic impacts, we're using a model called LM3, but we're going to keep clear of that generally today as it would require more explanation than we have time for. But we can always talk about it in the question and answer session afterwards if you wish. The final part of the tool looks at some what-if scenarios where we've made some suggestions about how change might be implemented to the food procurement. And they're fairly simple in their scope, at least to describe, but it means that we can also calculate what the impact of those changes might be. And the aim with this is to give you a sort of pathway to suggest how you might improve in the future. So we hope you're going to find this useful. We'd encourage you to use the tool yourself after the demonstration. You can see the address to download it or to register for it at the top of the screen here, and we'll show it again at the end. When you arrive at the data entry page, you'll find that the page is divided into sections which reflect the different parts of the procurement that we need to know about to do the calculations. The first section you'll see the food categories, and you can see these down the left-hand side. And what we ask you to do is to show 1 week's weight of each food category by percentage. So currently red meat is showing us 11%, and other meat at 7%, and so on down. But you can see the total at the bottom is showing 105%, and obviously we need to make that work to 100. So we can reduce the red meat by, say, to 6%, and now we have 100 at the bottom. So you can just play with these until you've got the results correct. And once you're happy with that, you can move on to the next stage. Here what we're really interested in is knowing a bit more about the meal that you're serving, again, for an average week. So here there's the average meal weight in grams. That's 490, which is actually quite high. We could make that, say, 400 grams. And you can move on down and make any changes you like. It's worth just noticing here that we're asking you for the number of weeks that you produce in the year. At the moment, that's set at 52, which is obviously every week. That's useful for things like hospitals or prisons or anywhere which does that kind of thing, or indeed private sector caterers. But a fairly typical school meal element would be, say, 38 weeks a year. And again, you can change any of those. The next stage is to ask you a bit more about the environment. And we're interested here in particular about waste. So we'd like you to tell us what you estimate, what percentage of food you estimate is plate waste every week. And we're aware this is probably the most difficult figure for people to estimate unless they've done some work on this specifically. And if you really can't, then we can use a default value within the system for you. But we'd say do your best. And at the moment it's set to 30, which we will leave. And then we also ask you, say, how do you dispose of that waste? And there are currently two options here. One is digester and the other is landfill. This does make quite a big difference to the outcome. So try and get that one right if you can. The last section, which I'm not going to dwell on now, is asking you about the financial impact of your meal service. And this enables us to calculate your local economic impact, or at least to give an indicator. I will just show you that at the moment the slide is at 100 and the bar is green. If any of the bits of information or the sliders on the page are actually not adding up, this bar at the bottom will turn red and you won't be able to submit the page. So just make sure it's green. And once it's green, you can submit the results and you're immediately taken to the results screen. The first graph that you're going to see when you reach the results page is this one. This is showing a comparison between the food weight that you've purchased and the carbon emissions the impact of that food weight has generated. The other thing to notice is that we've changed this, so we're now showing this data on a per annum basis, although that's also broken down, and I'll show you that in a second. On the left-hand side of the graph, we have the food weight by kilograms, and on the right-hand side, we're showing the carbon, so you can see a direct visual comparison between the two impacts, or the two quantities. And down on this axis, we have the various categories of food for which you entered information earlier in the tool. If we hover over any of the lines on the graph, you can see the quantitative data that lies behind the graph. And in this case, for example, you can see that we entered 6% by food weight of red meat, and that's generated 27% of the carbon emissions, total carbon emissions. So a very significant figure. And visually that shows that too, with a very small area to the left and a very big area to the right. By contrast, if we go down to, say, fruit and vegetables, you can see that the weight of food by percentage that we purchased was 51%, but that 51% has only generated 24% of the emissions. So a big difference between the two. As we go further down, we can see there are two additional categories in here. One is the disposal. And again, if you float over, you can see the disposal. In this case, it's only 1% because we were using a digester rather than landfill. But if you look at the bottom, you can see where we've summarized the key points. You can see that waste disposal is 1.1% of your total emissions. But if you had been using landfill, it would be 22.7%. So we're giving you some additional information and comparison information below. And finally, transport is worth saying a word about in that although it's significant, it's by no means the most significant of the results. And I think for a long time we've heard quite a lot about food miles, and I'm not suggesting we ignore them completely, but there are other things that we might concentrate on if we wish to make bigger differences quicker. And this very much is one of the key findings of the research. And obviously what this tool is doing is mirroring those patterns in research and matching them against your data. And this is what we see happening here. Finally, before I move on, on any of these tabs, you can see there's another link at the bottom, and which will take you to a document which shows exactly how these carbon emissions have been calculated. So the tool is completely transparent in that sense. When we move to the second slide, we're really concentrating here on what the effect of your plate waste is on the system, and we've divided that again into two different halves. On the left-hand side, we're showing you what the financial impact of that food that's being thrown away is. And in this particular example, we can say that it's cost you something just over 28,000 euros a year just in discarded value of food thrown away, which is it's really a pretty big figure, I think. And on the right-hand side, we're showing you what the embodied carbon of that food that you've thrown away is. Now, I just want to make the point here that this doesn't include the carbon cost of waste disposal. That's simply the carbon accumulated in the food in its production, delivery, and preparation. And again, it's showing you what the difference between the two halves of this is. So it is important, and plate waste is a very significant factor here, which we'll look at a bit more in a minute. The third area is a comparison area. Now, at the moment, this is not working fully, and I'll explain why in a minute. However, what we're showing as sort of good base benchmark comparators is what the total emissions in carbon per meal are for each meal, and what the total emissions per kilogram of food procured is over the whole of the procurement programme. And you can see that these two values are displayed here. However, what we're not able to show yet is what the average for your sector is. And the reason for that is very simple, in that we have not made this tool at all public yet. This is the first time it's been made publicly available in any sense. And so we can't show comparative data until you go away and use it, and we start accumulating the comparative data. As you do that, is very much our intention to start showing how your sector compares as against your peers in that sector, which might help you to know how well or badly you're doing. So we hope that we'll find that useful, but when and if that arrives, that's entirely under your control, not ours. Finally, I want to look very briefly at the economic impact element of the tool. We've stayed away from it because it requires more explanation. However, what we're showing here as a headline is that the total value to the local economy of this whole procurement is 3.8 million euros, and that for every euro spent, that generates €1.92 within your local economy. So again, what we're looking at here is not just the economic impact, but also some of the socio-economic impacts as well. That takes us really to the last part of the tool, which tries to suggest to you 4 pretty straightforward ways in which you might think about improving your outcomes. And we try to take one from each sort of section of the tool to help you guide through this. And you can switch these off or on as you desire. And you'll see that at the bottom, the impacts are calculated and totaled as required. If you want to achieve the maximum public value benefit, this is not pure euros in that sense, but it is public value, then the way to do it is by spending 10% more locally. And that puts an additional 183,000 euros into your local economy. But you can see that the biggest single saving, if you're interested in the carbon side in particular, is to change to digester, where you'll change to digester from landfill, where you can save 32,000. Of course, if you're already doing that, you can switch that off. It may be worth looking at the sort of this element as well, which is that the most effective sort of dual action is in fact to reduce your plate waste by 10%. And we talked earlier about about the impacts of plate waste, and really that addresses both sides at the same time. So, thank you very much for your attention. I hope you've felt that it's given you some idea of what's going on with this tool and whether and how it might be of use to you. I do want to emphasize this is a fully working proof of concept prototype. So it's not the final and finished completed article, but we do feel that it's in a position to give you useful and credible information about your food procurement. You can see the download address link here, and if you go there, you can simply register, which is a very simple process indeed. It's really about putting in your sector, so we can do the sector comparisons later. And do use the tool, and please do come back to either myself or to Angela if you've got any comments, queries, suggestions, or want to have a discussion in general. We're very keen to listen to people at this stage, because I think that's quite important. So, thank you very much for your attention, and I'll hand you back for the remainder of the webinar.